Okay. So welcome to episode 3 of the Safe to Lead podcast. This is we had an unfortunate incident in another room, so we had to relocate here. But this week we're going to be talking about esports finances in general. Not going to be focusing on Dota as much, although we will be looking at teams that participate in that specific esport. I have with me today a special guest for this episode. He works in mergers and acquisitions, and we're very blessed to have him on board for today. So today we're going to be talking about esports valuations, particularly like how accurate they are, and this sort of like and that how that accuracy sort of determines the like investments that come into these teams, particularly as we have all these big VC firms, and not to mention sort of traditional media or sports franchises purchasing or buying large shares in existing esports endemic organizations. So to start off, what do you think about the valuation process for
Yeah,
esports
sure.
organizations?
Thank you for having me as a part of the podcast. Very fun to be here. I guess just a little brief background. As Distortion did say, I do work in mergers and acquisitions, and I do play. I used to play competitively, like Overwatch, and play Melee competitively. But in terms of MOBAs, I'm not actually that familiar, and in esports teams, I'm not as well versed as Distortion. But what I can say is just from some of the literature that I've read that I've been given, how I think about like the esports industry is it's not exactly it's no longer I think as like nebulous as some people might say. I think esports as a term is becoming more and more of like a household term. It's not like again our I would say the most recent kind of industry in mind that I had where people were just like speculating, right, speculating rather than evaluating the industry would be like cryptocurrency. Like I think post 2016 it was more of a speculation process rather than evaluation. But now at this point where you have many teams, you have like certain teams like Evil Geniuses, like EG, they've been around since 1997. Like it's a fairly old industry and also a very like well you know layperson acclimated concept. So I think the valuations at this point, for any sort of more, I would say, mature or aging industry should start to come down. But we're seeing right here, as Distortion's pulling up this website of a Medium article discussing, a Forbes. This was a Forbes article from 2018 that created a compilation of valuations for some of the more notable esports teams, like for example Cloud9, TSM, and Team Liquid. These are some of the most valuable esports teams, and
in the West at least.
In the West, yeah, primarily in the West. Isn't TSM from Europe?
TSM.
Or I guess you're talking about West.
TSM
Europe
is
included.
Europe is included, and TSM is primarily actually a North American organization.
Oh, okay.
It's just that in Melee they've had left in. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's where I draw my knowledge from. But we kind of just look at the top 3 teams. Like the revenue multiples are all double-digit revenue multiples, and as far as I know, that's definitely for a revenue multiple. That's on the high end of any sort of revenue.
So what would be like an average revenue multiple for I guess like a more stable industry? Let's say something you've worked with.
Sure.
In the past.
So I work primarily in like in capital goods and industrials, so a very capital intensive industry. So any sort of industry that has more like operating costs, like typically we see much lower revenue multiples. I've seen that the average would probably be 3 to 5. I'd be hard pressed to find an industrials company or like a manufacturing company produce a revenue multiple higher than 8. That's been my experience at least.
Okay, so why is it that sort of the revenue multiples for esports companies and I guess like tech companies and things of that nature, why is it so much higher in your opinion?
So I think revenue is just sales. Revenue is like the top line, right? Revenue is the top line in terms of a calculation, and I believe the multiple that's created is basically the value, which is what they obtain, like valuation, uh, divided by how much revenue they're making. And I
Yeah.
think where the valuation comes from, like where the reason why the multiple
Why?
is so
Yeah.
high is because like they just think that the companies are valued a lot. And I'm still, so I'm, full disclosure, I'm pretty bearish on the esports industry in general. I think it's typically overvalued, and the overvaluation, I think why it typically, right, it's like you alluded to tech companies, why they're so highly valued. In my opinion, as I think that tech, at least still in our, our day and age in this year, we still think of it as a growing industry, which is, not to say without its reasons, like it's a growing industry, but a more mature, why we call them mature industries are more, or I guess a more capital intensive, literally just more physical goods industry. Why valuations tend to be lower is just it's on a strict sense more accountable. Like you can't get really wild with a valuation. So basically, like how do valuations spin out? Valuations can be either you can either obtain a valuation from accounting, a strict accounting, like being able to say like how many, let's say in this industrials company, let's say it's a automotive company. How many cars does this company produce each year, right? I can literally write down that number and then, create together an accounting valuation, like how many pieces, how much do the wheels cost, how much do the windows cost, how much do the paint cost. I can add all these costs together and say, here's like the inherent value of the car, and then a certain markup I sell for whether it's the brand, the warranty, all these sorts of these are accountable. And in industries like industrials, where you can, literally you'll be able to add these things up very easily, it's much more difficult to extrapolate a very high value. Whereas in tech, I think the other way you can get a valuation is through a story. So the first one is accounting, an accounting way of obtaining, a numerical, a quantitative way of obtaining a valuation. The other one's a quantitative or a qualitative, a more storytelling based one, where when you pitch to an investor, you say, look, like I know right now we're not generating that much revenue. I know right now it's just a bunch of guys, on a team. But if you can but listen, like here's the story. These guys are gonna be like rock stars. And for any sort of industry that's hyper focused on a brand, on a concept,
mass appeal type thing.
Exactly. Less so on the physical assets, the physical accountable assets. I think you can get very high valuations, and that's where I think, kind of in a long-winded sense of how I explain it, but in a short, the what is it? The short end of it, the shorter. Sorry, like the short what's the word, I'm stuck, but like basically to put it a long story short is to say that like I think they're telling really good stories. I think these teams do present a great appeal, a mass appeal to generate these valuations.
Yeah, and I will say there's a particularly I guess on the side of people looking to come into the field, there's a ton of these like really whack like esports consultants out in the field. You can go look at their LinkedIn's, you'll see they've never actually worked in any of these companies or in the industry as a whole, but they've been able to utilize Google or something like that, and I think the prevalence of like such I don't know what to call them, like scam artists in a sense, like it does somewhat like drive the valuations like kind of wild, especially since this is like industry doesn't have like that much accountability. From what I see, there's like you just hear stories of teams like going bankrupt all the time, like not paying their players. Like I don't think any of these teams on this list, by the way, are profitable. Just on like a side note, and I don't know. It is still to a large extent kind of a sketchy industry. I will say.
Yeah. I mean, this is a good transition into terms of talking about like, so we talked about the valuation earlier, like where we kind of think they got these values from. So I probably think it's just a really good story. It's like a really good story. Like that's how you get these investors in, right? You're able to convince them, despite the fact you don't have a very high like revenue generation, going on. You have a great story of when it will be profitable. And I mean, this isn't uncommon. This is not
Yeah. It's like this every startup.
Right now every startup has to be like that, and even for companies that are now like publicly listed. I mean, great examples from this year would be like Uber and Lyft, right? Very rarely have they had positive quarters, and yet they have like astronomical valuations. So it's not uncommon to see this.
And just a question: do you know where this like Forbes sort of like info comes from? Does it tend to be like from does Forbes has yeah does Forbes like the as a journalistic organization have their own like sort of like internal like people who like research this type of stuff, or do they get this from like a third party source?
So I think I would bet on it's a third parties. I mean, we could look. They should be writing their sources under where they got their information.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna. What is this?
Like you go all the way to the bottom. It's 2018 estimate. I don't know where that estimate comes from.
Yeah, I'd like to know as well.
Yeah.
Oh no, this is like specific from. What is this?
Oh, it's an ad.
Yeah.
Looks like they didn't cite their sources. Dude, classes lied to us.
I'm actually kind of confused here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is. Oh, actually, I wanted to bring up just another point real quick. So you talked about how like, as opposed to like cryptocurrency, there's like, less of a sense of speculation here. And I actually like to push back on that a little because I just kind of realized like this year and last year specifically, there's been this like rise of prominence of sorts in esports, mainly because of like Fortnite. I'd say, and it's like I think it's become even more of a household, like much more of a household name than before, solely because of Fortnite and like people like Ninja and whatnot. And there are now like a bunch of people who much more like more than before who have kind of no clue what they're talking about, coming into the space once again. And I will also note there have been like just kind of big crashes in the history of esports, to say, particularly around the last recession, like 2008. I forgot to bring this up earlier, but there used to be this actually television league in Counter-Strike, focusing on Counter-Strike source called CGS. I'll bring that up. Yeah, it's just so old and irrelevant at this point that it's champion gaming subsidiary.
So literally lasted a year from.
So yeah, so this was being broadcast on cable television, and it was like a franchise league, sort of like Overwatch is right now. And this thing lasted for, let's say, 2 years, and they just kind of randomly like shut down at the end.
Yeah.
Just due to a lack of money. And yeah, they were like holding stuff in like Fox Studios. Like this was like a pretty big project at the time. So I think there is definitely a decent, healthy amount of speculation going on.
I agree with you on that. I was just saying that like. I was saying earlier, like cryptocurrency. No, I agree with you on that. My point was like I think cryptocurrency was in my recent memory, a speculative market. As is, like I would say another one could be like marijuana, right? Like these are like industries that like haven't been properly valued before, so I can understand where all these like crazy valuations come from. But these valuations, what I'm saying is they shouldn't fall under. It shouldn't be falling, I guess prey to speculative like opinions. They should be more accountable, but it seems like it isn't the case.
I think it's just interesting. Yeah, there definitely do seem to be like waves of speculation, as I talked about before. I think it just tied to the fact that there are constantly new games coming out. Like some of these, like Fortnite was like just tremendously popular, like one of the most, despite not having like a very well established like esports component, like was very popular. And then people sort of equated the two to a large extent. Like people were saying, Ninja was they were saying he was one of the best, like Hall of Famer, like esports, despite the fact that I don't think like anybody could actually like name like a big tournament he's won or anything like that, and the fact that he's like mainly like a streamer, of course. And then so you have a lot of people who low understanding, and then these people like they include investors, of course, like and newer folks wanting to come into the scene, and I think that's part of what's driving these valuations this time. I think like people just they don't like to look at the history, right? Like or they just sort of neglect to. Is this like a common problem actually? Like when all these like new people with like some new industry emerges, like or something like that, is there often like even in like I guess a field like esports where there's a fairly extensive like previous like history of how to like do things, how to like run these organizations, what sort of like methods work the best. Is there still sort of an issue you think, at least in like the finance industry, of just sometimes not listening to the people who actually work inside the industry? Because I think this is something I've heard with like team owner interviews or like journalist interviews. Like there's people talk about like I don't know like these 50 to 60-year-old these boomers, if you will, sort of uh, investors or CEOs. I'm thinking like Robert Kraft type people here, who, despite esports being around for a long time, it was also like niche for quite a long period of that, and they're now many of them are now coming in. You have all these companies, these like Blizzards, whatnot, giving these like somewhat ridiculous pitches, and then do you think that's like an aspect that's being ignored, the previous history?
So like, why are we kind of saying like why like are you saying why the investors don't listen?
Yeah. So is there some like do you think is there some like arrogance in the invest in like by investors when they sort of try to jump on these new industries? Is that like a thing in general?
I mean,
Like you think with like so much money on the line, they'd be willing to be like very, very precise, like go and like wanna hire people who give them a like very accurate valuation.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, like
what are the incentives?
To start off, like here's a factoid about like. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was done. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So like, I mean, like to start off, like I would say, if we looked at primarily like who's been investing in a lot of these esports companies, whether it's like early stage esports or growing stage esports companies, and most of them seem like they're venture capital. So at least from what I know of venture capital, the purpose of a venture capital firm is to find the unicorn. So there's definitely arrogance involved in that sense, but there's also they're not so concerned about making sure everything is accounted for, because for every single like venture capital investment that's profitable, like they find a unicorn, there's probably like 30 that aren't. So I think that's like the sort of like framework that most venture capitals are working off of, and that's perhaps this is almost sort of in support of esports valuations, is that maybe it is the case that like they're purposely just, I mean, if they're not, because we see a lot of reports that they're not profitable, right?
Yeah.
But if it's primarily venture capitalists investing in it, it's going to be the case that most of them aren't profitable, because like venture capital firms that invest in early stage companies like these esports teams, they're not exactly looking for like every single investment being like a good investment. They're looking for the one that will break through, which is probably also, again, this is like kind of in support of these like wonderful like these fairy tale story valuations of the esports companies, is that maybe perhaps one of these companies will become the next like thing, like maybe the esports team or organization that leads into the next like generation of gamers, esports, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Do you want to take a second to talk about Overwatch League then? Because that seems to. So when we're talking about the next big thing, it feels like at least in esports that's going to be more of like a team brand thing, right, rather than a game. Because if you think about it, like how many like popular games have sort of like risen up and fallen like within the span of like a year and a half in terms of like popularity. I think Overwatch is a good example, which is why I wanted to talk about that in a second. But like things like all the previous iterations of Counter-Strike, let's say like Call of Duty, I guess, to name one. StarCraft is actually a pretty big one. Like the player counts are like kind of abysmally low nowadays relative to how it was previously. And we've also seen like entire genres of games like sort of fall out of favor. I think the fighting game scene is remarkably like stable in that sense, where it's kind of maintained a consistent and like steady like growth. But like MOBAs, like 2 to 3 years ago, they were like the big thing. Now it's like battle royale. More
like battle royale team shooters sort of thing, right?
Yeah,
not even battle royale, like Fortnite, PUBG, that sort of thing.
They went from MOBAs to like hero shooters, like Overwatch.
Yeah.
Like there were like 10, almost not 10, like many Overwatch clones coming out.
Yeah, what was that one?
There's like Paladins.
There was that other one with the like basically the exact
with a really
ripoff.
stupid ad like on YouTube that
Yeah.
played every time. It was some really stupid name. It was like Revengers or something.
Yeah, something.
It had some like weird title, but
something so that, yeah, but I got you mean.
yeah, but I think the Overwatch League, on the other hand, is a league where you're buying in for. So I'll try to get some of the details on the screen. But from what I understand, people are buying in for. Oh, is this for this year? This is not recent, but people were buying in for 20 million.
Mm-hmm.
Overwatch is like gonna be the same game for like quite a while. The popularity is already like waning, especially when you look at Korean PC bong numbers. Let me PC bong. Which is like a decent metric. God. Okay, so I'll give you my sort of current knowledge. So back in 2016, Overwatch was that like 40% or something? 30%. Okay.
Yeah.
And it was like beating League of Legends. Now Overwatch is like top 8. It's definitely a single digit number. I think it's under 5%. And like FIFA Online is beating it right now. And just show how much these things sway. And these are very random articles, but we'll just get back to this, I guess. So the Overwatch League, like, I think the entire premise seems a little flawed at this point, and I'm kind of interested to see why all these companies actually bought in. So I'll pull up a list of teams and I'll like tell you who sort of what owns what, who owns who. Okay, I think the Wikipedia page actually is a decent resource.
Okay.
So yeah, we actually have all these.
Right. So a lot of very recent joiners, despite falling numbers in terms of like people playing it.
Yeah, and you have people. These are people still buying in for 20, maybe 30 million at this point, from all over the world. Yeah. So just to give some big investors. So Cronky, I'm not saying this correctly. So they own like So these are all the teams they own. So it's a bunch of Colorado teams actually. So almost like football, both varieties. Hockey,
ice hockey, wow.
Hockey, yeah, football, both varieties, and Nuggets are baseball, right? Yeah. So just to give another example. Are you familiar with this company?
No.
Okay. Comcast, like obviously the pretty big one. Kraft, like that's Robert.
Yeah,
Kraft.
very big.
So what are your thoughts on this?
People
the
joining?
Overwatch League specifically, and I guess we don't have as much like literature to go off of in this case, but like what are your general sort of thoughts?
I guess so. General thoughts is like kind of first of all like echoing your point that like a lot of stuff in this industry or any industry for that matter could come in like waves, and despite dropping numbers, that just might mean that. So like in a very finance mindset sort of way, or even like more abstract an economics mindset sort of way, a lot of people might just think that this is a good time to buy in, because you don't want to buy in because like the quote unquote smart money doesn't want to buy in when things are like rising or like things are like very high, right? They like to see a little dip in the viewership, a little dip in the viewership if it's viewership is a proxy for potential profitability, and maybe they want to buy in during a time where there's falling viewership.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a sign that it's stable and they are more confident in their valuations. Okay. Or, I mean, in the sense that Overwatch still isn't that old, right? We didn't know it. We didn't I remember like me and my friends in like high school talking about this new game that's going to be coming out, and like so it's pretty young in terms of a game still. It's not like a very like because you mentioned earlier, right? You're talking about like Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, Call of Duty, all these other games that have had like many iterations. Maybe why there hasn't been a big like I remember like MLG, right? MLG like in the mid 2000s, right? It was a big thing for like Call of Duty and Counter Strike.
Mhm.
Now it's like no one really invests in those sorts of games. That's because like I feel like they've seen these iterations play through, and they're like it's no longer profitable or there's no potential for high profitability. Where it's Overwatch, I think is still it's like less than what 4 years old.
Yeah, it's
right?
2016. Right?
Yeah, so it's less than 4 years old. So I think there might be people who are thinking that now is just a good time to buy in. Like there's a good chance that they're gonna have a second coming.
So what's interesting with those two titles, I probably should have given you the context before, but they're actually so MLG got absorbed into Activision. Actors, so like, they're helping run the Overwatch League right now. Kind of an interesting, little tidbit there. But they want to start a Call of Duty franchise league too.
Really?
Next year, yeah.
Okay, I mean,
which is a game that which has been around for longer certainly and has, I guess more consistency in terms of like viewership and like a fan base. Like they're getting like 70,000, like 80,000 in their like finals, like world finals. I might be underestimating that. It might be a little higher, but it's still like a far cry from like the biggest sort of esports. And with regards to Counter Strike, it's a bit weird of a game because it's definitely a game where like there's waves of like different investment, and also there are a lot of like these like VC firms that are like going into from all around the world, in fact, that are going into Counter Strike, and it's actually inflating the salaries in that game really high. Like I talked to you earlier about the 20K like per month salaries on like a team like Liquid right now, just in CS:GO, and I'm pretty sure those are like just like the top tier salaries throughout all of esports right now. Yeah, and there's also some like Russian teams that are being paid like 20,000 about like a month from reports that I'm aware of. And I also kind of wanted to bring in this. I'll talk like for a quick bit about this like viewership angle in Overwatch. So people have been saying that the viewership has like kind of been declining for a long time. So apparently, like I remember the first few weeks of the Overwatch League, the figure was like incredible. It was like 400,000, like 500,000. This was like the ultimate peak. And I don't know if you noticed, because we actually like watched the season 2 finals yesterday, and there were like 200,000 viewers for the finals.
Right,
like,
less
and
than
these were like some regular season games in last year. So it feels like I think what they've said, the statement from the league itself has been that the viewership, like the peaks have sort of gone down, but there's more consistency now. But there've also been like reports actually of them buying like ad space. So what they'll do is they'll buy ad space on like different websites, and they'll just have the stream running like in the ads. It's a very crafty tactic actually for any enterprising folks out there who want to start inflate your viewership numbers a bit. You can buy this sort of ad space on like Wikipedia, not the main ones, like the fandom like pedias, like the Narutopedia, the anime
wikis.
ones, the alternative wikis, if you will, and doing things of that nature. There was also this strange like sort of situation when they had like this electrical failure during one of the home games that they were trying this year, and the viewership kind of just stayed the same throughout the movement. Like there was just like a blank screen, like a black screen on the stream. That was a little questionable. It's a little curious because you would expect people to like just leave for a while. Like I don't know, like in any other tournament when there's technical issues, people leave, and in this case it was about the same. So there's some sort of question marks there, and do you have any other like thoughts about like Overwatch specifically, like the Overwatch League, and also like franchise leagues in general? Because that's something that's very uncommon for esports. Like most titles like Dota, Counter Strike, all the fighting games, Melee, Ultimate, etc. It operates on like a circuit system, sort of more like tennis, where there's just these random tournaments throughout the year. There might be like a world championship or something organized by the developer. But otherwise, it's just like different like tournament organizers, like existing companies in the scene. Whereas Overwatch it's all like in house. They actually completely axed the existing. So there was like a tournament scene beforehand, but they they said that we're gonna take the broadcasting rights at this point, and we're not gonna issue licenses for anybody. I think was the idea.
Interesting.
For the most part. And so they kind of axed that completely. So this is sort of like an artificial way for the developers to sort of grow the league and or maintain the league, because now they have full control over everything at this point. So yeah, just given that tidbit and everything we've talked about, any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I guess first of all, I want to get something clear. So like Overwatch is owned by so it's Blizzard that's heading this whole operation.
It's the Activision Blizzard.
Activision Blizzard, yeah. So they're heading this operation. So it's not they're not really doing. So we're talking about the team's valuation, or is it just as an operation? Like what's?
I think it's all tied together, right? Because I think they have, like the NFL, they have some sort of like profit sharing like model between all the teams. I know specifically, for example, that this is something they've changed for the new season. All the merch sales are evenly distributed between all the teams. So before, if you're like really good at promoting your own like team brand, you had like a lot of like, I don't know, very media savvy players. Like you could sell a lot of like t-shirts and stuff. That money would go to you. Now it's like evened out, I think.
Between
all the teams, and really? I think that's the way it's worked in the NFL. I'm not 100% on that. But I know the NFL has like a profit sharing like sort of component.
Okay.
So how the teams perform is very integral to how the Overwatch League performs, and also very importantly, like these teams are all like, what the hell is this? All these teams are specific to Overwatch. None of these like, some of these brands might share similar colors. Like this is Optic, this is Cloud9, but they're all unique brands to Overwatch, and that's something they like stipulated when they were creating the league, that each team had to create a unique like individual brand for just Overwatch League.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting. I think at this point I would say like I would probably need to do research into sort of like precedent leagues of that sort, because it looks like, I don't know, perhaps it's still too early to call for anybody, but like you said the Call of Duty league that they're trying to build up too, right? Yeah. Like, I mean, clearly maybe they're doing something right, at least from the two like sort of seasons it's 2 seasons so far, right? Yeah, they've done this, so like maybe there's something that's working here. My idea would just be like you said, the NFL does something similar to this. I guess given the fact, I mean, maybe just the. Let's see here.
Here's a little snippet on that from QR. I hope this is accurate. Okay, so all the TV rights revenue is split equally. Okay, so it's okay, so apparel and stuff is unique to each team. It looks like in NFL. I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that now it's different for Overwatch, where I was gonna say, yeah, the team split the t-shirt sales. Okay, here, let's watch. We can take a look at this article real quick about the Call of Duty League. I'm just gonna look at any like this. These are all just like generic details. Okay. All right. So there's a lot of overlap with Overwatch. What it looks like. Yeah, Wolpoons, the Mets owners. Okay, this video is broken. Oh yeah, so they're actually like, so FaZe famously, I think they decided not to join the league. Their owner actually posted this. He was in this sort of podcast where he discussed that the buying cost was just way too high and it didn't make any financial sense actually, which is pretty funny. Yeah, it just always feels kind of weird when these like sort of endemic teams, like FaZe obviously being like, it's almost kind of like a meme, like how they represent the elite gamer, sort of thing. And they're a little bit different because they have their sort of like social media like presence, and that's more a very important aspect of their business. But it's just really interesting how there are a bunch of endemic like organizations sort of stepping out of these projects. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I definitely think it's interesting, and all I can really kind of like sort of comments that I can make about this is just that I guess if someone's I mean, someone clearly thinks this is profitable, if or like Activision Blizzard itself thinks it's probably profitable with creating a Call of Duty league as well. Um, Maybe this model works better than what other models have been like other sort of they like for a game like Overwatch, maybe it's just very difficult. Actually, I would say yes. Like for a game like Overwatch, it's probably very difficult for them to behave in a circuit sort of model compared to fighting games, in my opinion. I think fighting games are much for like team. This is just my opinion. I don't have any expertise over the space. It's just from a very like peripheral observation. It seems like team-based games where you need like lots of people, like MOBAs too. Even I think having more of a league is perhaps, or not even a league, just like a fewer sets of tournaments, but on a larger scale is better than small tournaments, but in a larger
That makes
quantity.
sense, yeah. And
No, I mean I just think it's easier for like fighting games, where it's like 1-on-1 or 2-on-2 to be done in a very like massive like low scale but high quantity manner compared to like
it's
team
like
games.
it's like tennis golf versus
Yeah, tennis golf versus like basketball.
basketball, soccer.
Yeah, NFL, right?
Is the name sure? Okay, so we have a. Yeah, there's nothing about the profitability. What's annoying is there's a player named this I think is over here. There's a player named Profit who's playing the league. So like all his name like it also tags all the articles where like, they're talking about him when
Profit,
I try to search up about this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I guess we'll move on from Overwatch. Just in this case. So let's. Do you want to take a look at Did you do the look at Optic? The Infinite Esports.
No, I didn't. Let's pull it up real quick.
Okay. I think I had that in the Google Doc. So it was like this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was on this site. I close a bunch of this.
Kill these link. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I pulled the one about the like.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Oh yeah. So there was literally for your as per relevant to your field, like there was literally a acquisition here by a Mortals Gaming Club.
Mm-hmm.
Of Green Wall or Optic Entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking at this company, founded in 2006, status M&A, right? Green Wall. So Green Wall was purchased by Immortals, is the case.
By Immortals, yeah.
Right, acquired, yeah. So deal amount is $100 million, and it's literally under 40 employees. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is like a lower. Like lower middle market size deal, basically. It's in the sense. So to put that into like finance terms, it's like a very small deal.
Yeah.
Like this sort of deal wouldn't make it like it wouldn't. It would definitely. This must have been. I don't know. Was there like a sort of?
It was big in the esports scene. That was
yeah. So that I mean that's. It
was just because of the fans, because Optic has a huge sort of fan base.
I mean that's a good detail too. It's like very small in terms of a deal size. Like $100 million is very small.
Yeah.
But like the latest deal amount looks like they're what provider of esports. Like if we look at Immortals Gaming Club, go to their page. Investors 18 platform create long professional gamers.
This is they dropped their 15
okay.
This isn't even accurate. Yeah.
So I mean they've purchased a lot of companies. Latest deal announced 30 million. So yeah, I mean like the industry is very small, obviously in terms of like how much. Like despite very high valuations, relative to their multiple, right? Like a 14x multiple, industry average 14x multiple. Like these are still very small, I guess, in my like opinion, small size like purchases. But just because it's a small size purchase, doesn't mean we could just say we don't care about its profitability. If its profitability is not there, it's still not a good investment. So I guess like. My thoughts on this is if you look at this website, what it's been saying so far is that Infinite Esports, their acquisition was done after the revenue generating stage, which at least demonstrates some sort of like once a company starts generating revenue, it's much more easy to value it. So maybe this was a good acquisition. Maybe this is just sort of the direction that the industry is going in.
Yeah. I should have given this context before. So what happened was Infinite kind of got like they kind of they were in a very dire financial states when this happened. So let's find some articles from this. If in future podcasts, actually, let's I'll try to plan this out more with articles and stuff.
Okay.
I'll do more research. That'll be on me.
No, I'll have to read these two ahead of time. It's just like it was.
All right, Infinite Esports. I have to search Optic because that's what gets the headlines.
Mm-hmm.
Optic. I can't do this. So what happened was, so they sort of had their original owner, Hex, Hector Rodriguez, very very beloved, within the community at least, and this venture beats like a decent source here. I'll just keep this up for now. So what happened was they had this their original run with Call of Duty particularly, and Hex was a very strong driving force behind that. He made some pretty intelligent choices when they were moving into other games in terms of positioning people for success. And eventually, he sort of sold out in a sense. I think he sold most of his shares, and then that's when they transferred ownership to this Infinite group, Infinite Esports group, and I did some renaming. And after this was a series of disasters for the group. So I'm gonna bring up the most notable one, Optic India, which was a relatively short-lived team, mainly because they had a known sort of cheater on their team actually. Wow. And this was 100% due to a lack of vetting on the team's part. And there's a picture from the event. So the admin literally he came up and he actually found the cheat on his computer. It was on a USB actually, and wow. It was called he named it word.exe on the USB, the file name. It was ridiculous. And I guess we can pull out some of the clips for entertainment, but it was so obvious even from a layman's perspective that he was cheating. The in-game clips were literally.
Oh my god! 4 seconds from Optic India. Oh my god! 4 seconds from
Optic. He has a laser pointer on. He's just shoot he has. Literally, his stats actually were better than some of the top players at the time, despite playing these local events. Yeah. If you looked at statistics, they were he was going to be either the best player in the world or something weird was going to happen. So, and then there were sort of these mismanagement sort of mishaps. They had and then with their main CS:GO team, they had this they let all these players go randomly, and the team became dog shit. And then they got a bunch of random Danish players, and they're still They're still kind of doing poorly today.
Right.
And it just shows having this sort of GM figure step away was a really big deal. And then everything kind of came crashing down, and they got bought by Immortals.
That's very interesting. Background. So with that sort of background, I think it's very interesting because what exactly are they buying? They're buying a brand, right?
Yeah,
a brand that's been soiled.
It's the Optic. Well, it's the Optic Call of Duty brand. And that's which is their biggest. And the geniuses at Infinite Esports, when they were trying to figure out what to do to kind of stay afloat, they were considering selling the Call of Duty team, and they were not even selling. They were considering shutting it down, despite it being the crux of the team. If you think Optic, you think Call of Duty,
right.
Or TSM, you think League of Legends.
Yeah,
mostly.
Exactly.
It's I don't know. It was a little ridiculous, and that's why I sort of wanted to ask about the arrogance sort of factor before, but because not even with investors, but just people, there are also a ton of business people in general coming into esports, many times becoming So once these in the lifetime of the esports organizations, once they reach the size where the original owners sort of want to get out for a bit, they want to cash in, they'll sell it to some other like ownership group or VC firm or whatever, and then they'll sort of put in their own people, and all of this often leads to like disaster, and that's sort of why I alluded to the arrogance component earlier, because it feels like some of these decisions are like things that might only sound good on paper, or like don't even sound good on paper, but they're just kind of doing it because they think it's the right thing, the right idea to do. Yeah.
No, I mean it's a good point to raise as to like the arrogance in the industry and the sort of like the lack of concern. Maybe there's just a misalignment of incentives. Like there's just like this. I think this is like a good sort of like initial podcast and like kind of get together ideas.
Yeah.
I think it's if it's like so far like I feel like what we've like to summarize, because we're hitting the 1 hour mark soon.
Yeah, we'll be done in 10 minutes.
Oh yeah, exactly. So like I guess like sort of like summarize like what's points we could focus on. First of all, it's like valuation, right? It's like how do we tackle valuation? That could be another segment, like more fully, right? Like looking at all this stuff.
Yeah, I'd love to do that in the future.
Yeah. Looking at the point you just made about like sort of like the arrogance in the industry, but also my point is like the sort of incentives in the industry. It's like who cares, right? Like who's because like for those stuff like those sort of like these I guess like the sort of scandal or like having a cheater on stage and ruining an industry that's so driven by the brand, because there's no products, right? Like if you're caught with a cheater like just on your team, like a very poor vetting process, you have to question whether it's arrogance or just a lack of incentive to check these, like to vet and just have safeties in place, which is weird because in my mind for again for an industry where the brand is so important, right? Like what are they selling? They're selling this idea of a team. How could you not like maintain like the integrity?
Yeah, that's what I want. Yeah, that's the part I'm sort of been confused about the whole time while I've been sort of engaging and like looking into this like space. Like it seems there are just all these very stupid like decisions being made every day. Very often after this sort of cash in happens. So actually, I think the EG the Peak 6 people, I think they're doing, so there's like the other end of this, right? There were either the original like sort of GMs, owners have stayed on in some capacity, or with EG like this Peak 6 deal, they're making a lot of big moves to get into like other big games right now. So they purchased actually just like a top 5 CS:GO team, like literally like the deal was announced like over the weekend, I think. And this is like basically a completely new direction for them, because EG kind of was relegated to being like a smaller org in the 2010s, I'd say. Particularly after they were bought by Twitch/Amazon for a while, but then there was some like weird conflict of interest questions and stuff with like Twitch being a very big streaming platform, so they ended up breaking away, and then they dropped like almost all their teams. Like they had a Call of Duty team and like a Dota team left, and some like Hearthstone players, and PPMD. Well, I guess they're not paying him, so
I don't think they're paying him. Yeah,
he's just kind of there. But now they're getting back to CS:GO. They're getting back to the League of Legends. Just like putting a ton of money out there. So what's your experience been with Peak 6 actually? Having worked in Chicago.
I mean, I know.
What have you heard about the company actually?
I can't really speak to that, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say anything. I mean, like I don't
not
know.
Like private, just like is reputation sort of like a private?
I mean, they recruit here on campus. I have
that's true.
they're clearly they're a pretty big presence in Chicago. They're like a notable firm. Like we have alumni.
Yeah.
There, so like.
Okay, so it is a very like reputable like investment organization.
Yeah, I mean like it's like a trading sort of like asset manager sort of like firm, I would say. I mean, this is an interesting thing to read on. Like, I wonder if they have like a prospectus or anything on this.
Yeah, it seems like they're doing like a very like intelligent job in terms of like actual like on the ground like esports moves they're making. Like,
I mean,
they're immediately like one of the top teams in CS:GO. Like, I think if you make a power ranking, like some people might put them first actually, because they just won like a tournament and beating.
Let's read through this. Let's read what sort of like it would go down, right?
Yeah.
To do this.
Yeah, so they divested from Twitch in 2016. They were owned for about like 3 or 4 years. Philip, based movie reviewer, also he was manager of the Dota team for quite a number of years. Actually, the funny thing about the EG like ownership, like they've had so many like random sort of CEOs like during this in between period. Like so PPD, who was like the captain of EG, like he kind of got like forced out of the team at the very end. So he became the CEO for like a year just to like try something new.
Just to try something new.
It was pretty funny. Yeah.
I mean, no, it's interesting. Like as a firm, like I don't know that much about Peak Six. Like there are people that like honestly like heck we could reach out to if we wanted to figure out more about this, but I wasn't aware that it was. First of all, like I just wasn't aware that they were purchased and they had this sort of move.
Yeah, I remember you sending me an article about that. It was a long time ago. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But who knows? I mean, to continue to like on this segment of like more things we kind of explore as to like where we can go deeper, more in depth, like sort of the middle of our the middle of this conversation we'd be having, talking beyond the valuation and more just like industry dynamics, right? So the first one we covered was just again like I'm doing this also as a summary of my own. It's like valuation. How do we justify what's going on? Is this legitimate? Is it not? The second one being like the arrogance or lack of incentives, or where are the incentives in this industry? And then the third one I say like a good place to also continue to do work on is like the concept of like, because esports, like we could start like esports is niche, but we could also start breaking it up into more granular categories. Like we're talking about fighting games, MOBAs, like all these different categories you listed earlier in your example of Overwatch League, right? It's like circuits versus big scale franchises, corporate owned like competitions like.
And something unfortunately we won't have time to get into today is like everywhere else in the world, like China particularly, like I think with the amount of money, it's almost like a completely different game there. Like and they are sort of I guess what they call it, the precedent there sort of is a little different, where all the esports organizations, from my knowledge, are like playthings sort of these like really rich billionaires or like children. Whereas in the West, they're I guess a little more like legit type investment.
Yeah, like entrepreneurial endeavors that get picked up by like actual investors rather than.
And so the scene is completely different over there.
Yeah.
Which is something we can talk about. I think we were just talking about some of the specific teams at the end, and tying that all back to everything before.
And one more thing actually, like so that's like another thing we didn't have to cover this time, because like I think we were primarily like Western focused in this episode, but obviously like that's different dynamics, right? Because I think it's a completely different dynamic, different incentives in China or like the East in general, China in general.
Korea's a little weird actually. I think almost from just my knowledge of the League of Legends scene, like the Chaebol.
Yeah, exactly.
A bunch of Chaebol. I'm saying that completely wrong, but a lot of them are the ones like owning these like big teams, and it comes off a little funny to us in the West. You have a team called like Samsung Galaxy. Like, In the league, but it's also like different there, and.
No, exactly. I think another point that could be explored later. I think you sent me an article about it too. Is like how the team, like how much clout or I guess like value do the team players carry? I think it's something else we could explore. Like how much are they getting paid, right? Yeah. Or sometimes the lack of how much they're getting paid, or even like if a team member gets into like a fight or like beef on Twitter or whatever with someone else on their own team or with a different team, like how that affects like the image. Because do you ever wonder like people like they follow the team, but I feel like they also they have like their own followings, right? So like,
people tend to follow players mostly in esports. It's the sort of reverse of traditional sports.
Yeah, traditional sports, right?
What was I gonna say? I think there's this interesting angle where we can look at like contracts, esports contracts.
Yeah.
I'm not too familiar with contract law, but like there's a lot of people who sort of do these like breakdowns, regardless. And a lot of these contracts, even today, are still pretty garbage. I think there's I've heard people various people mentioned sort of this like TI contract in Dota. So you know how like there's a ton of prize money at the international in Dota. It's like kind of like it's which is the most famous like aspect of it in a sense. So there are teams who will qualify through like the qualifiers, and they'll be like a long shot team, or they should have barely made it in, and it won't have like a sponsor because maybe they formed it at the last second. So like a random organization will swoop in. They'll say, if you place above top 8, which is probably over like 2 million or 1 million at this point, we'll take 50%. But otherwise, you'll get we'll take like 10%, and if you place below that, and we'll provide the boot camp stuff. And many teams will actually sign this stuff.
I mean, these people probably just aren't thinking about the statistics of the contract.
Yeah, I mean it's just like so rough to actually get like to sort of do this on your own, because I think TI does like hotel bookings and stuff and things like that, but it can be really rough to set up like a proper like practice environment beforehand.
Yeah, and I even think exactly that's even more interesting. So first of all, we were talking about like how much players are getting paid. We're talking about the contracts they're signing, and then you mentioned the dynamic, how it's different from traditional sports. I think that's actually a very fantastic point to touch on, because it's esports, right? It's not like how do we think it, from my very rudimentary knowledge of how people join like professional sports leagues, like basketball or whatever, it's like they get recruited, right? They have like these talent from a young age, this sort of culture to promote.
A college
system. There's a college, high school, you got varsity to make into colleges, where colleges give them contracts, and then some students get recruited directly out of high school or directly out of college,
depending on the
circumstance. So, but like for esports, right? Like you said, there's just not. I mean, University of Irvine, University of California, Irvine has
the college team is like it's pathetic. Like you can find the top collegiate teams in any of the schools. Like you could probably find like 5 like high MMR players, let's say in Dota, like in the circuit, and they'll destroy them probably.
So that's funny, because I think like at least in the West, right? I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's like in the West, you said earlier, which I agree with. This is what my knowledge and my experience has been with watching esports. The players hold a lot of clout, because like I feel like how they get onto that stage. I don't know if you're more familiar with how people get recruited into teams and when they sign these contracts.
So I'll be very blunt. I think the main process is actually like this very like weird nebulous like networking thing where people that they'll recruit their friends basically.
Yeah. So obviously there's biases. That's not a very good.
It's pretty process. The scouting is like almost.
Yeah, and on top of that, it's like, why don't these players, maybe it is just a lack of support, but why don't these players just sign better contracts? So like if you're a big shot, I mean, maybe it's like if you're an early stage player, you want to get your name out, joining a team is good. But if you're like a big streamer, right, you're earning a good amount of your early career revenue from Twitch, right, or from whatever stream sites, just from having people watch you. Why are you so at the whims of a corporate entity like a team or any sort of these leagues? Because right, you carry all the value. Players watch you; they don't watch the team.
For sure. And I think that's part of the. So there's a bunch of different dynamics going on here. I think that's the case. That is the case in CS:GO, where there's like a salary inflation problem. Like there's no offense to the CS:GO players, obviously, but it doesn't make sense for them to getting like 20,000 a month, like at this point. Like given the size of the market and whatnot, like it doesn't make no sense, because that doesn't factor in like prize money and like other benefits and whatever.
Yeah, I think this is very confusing. I think we need to like.
Actually, also to mention, I think players always tend to, when presented with salary or benefits, they always choose salary. So that's another reason for the inflation.
Yeah.
In a sense. But also to add to your point, like many of these players are under the age of 20 when they like sort of enter these things, and they don't have like access to lawyers. Like obviously they don't have the financial resources. Many of them to sort of give like a economics 101 sort of take to this, like many of them may come from like lower income backgrounds because how do I say this like in a tactful way, like people who like come from like wealthier families, they tend to like be forced to do
I exactly know what you got,
or their parents won't like support them at all in this case.
Yeah, esports is still taboo in those sorts of households.
Yeah, and even like, and you could probably make more money in most cases doing some other sort of like finance job or something like that, like some that you can get through like a network, especially if you're a wealthy individual. So you have people who don't have much of these resources, who are come in and they're sort of like very wide-eyed, starry-eyed, young kids coming in, and they'll just like basically sign the contract without reading it half the time. What was the other question?
And then the other question is like, why? So like they sign, but then so the first, like, my point was like they sign a contract that's not beneficial to them, but at the same time there's a problem of salary inflation where you think they're getting paid too much for what they're doing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So to add on that, in CS:GO especially, there's a phenomenon where, I guess we can call it the Immortals phenomenon to some extent, where Immortals came in to the CS:GO scene a while ago, and this was more something that was happening in League, but they offered very high salaries. So then all the players were like, the players will talk to each other in their own like Discord servers or whatever. So they'll be like, wow, this person's getting paid XYZ. So they'll go back to the negotiation board. Yeah. And then owners will be forced to raise the salary in this case, especially if they have like a very successful team, very successful brand. Yeah. And then this kind of just keeps going on, as you might imagine. And I think that's what happened in CS:GO. To some extent, this started with the Virtus Pro players. I think which was like a Russian team. They were getting paid a shit ton. I'm not sure whether that was just like a link in the process. That's probably not the beginning. But yeah, so we're just over the 1 hour mark. We're gonna end this like very soon. So let's wrap up with just like final thoughts on this whole topic, like things. What are your thoughts about the future of the esports scene? Like more specifically, like do you think there'll be like another crash? That's sort of like something that's happened before with the financial crisis.
I said earlier, I think I'm bearish on like current valuations of the esports. And just my opinion is just that I don't, even as someone who grew up playing like a lot of video games and someone who like continues to like enjoy like video game culture and like competitive video game culture, none of the casual bullshit, but like I enjoy that sort of environment. I just think so far it's just still too niche for them to be a mature industry. It's funny, right? Because I'm contradicting what I said earlier, because I think it is not a new industry. But I think it's just, I guess mature and young aren't the words to describe it. It's more niche, right? It's just too niche of an industry. It's like a movie that has a cult following, right? That sort of, I feel like it belongs in that realm. That's just not, it's still taboo in many circles. Even like, I feel like even for people who like, because like, people always make this argument, right? You make this argument that like, they're like, oh, like esports is. I heard this one said to me, it's like esports is gonna be popular. Look at how many 12-year-olds play Fortnite. There's a difference, I think, between casual gamers and
that's true.
This competitive game. There's probably a growing number, and like our generation will be the first generation of people who grew up playing games, and a lot of them casually, right? Yeah. Like everyone, maybe our parents from our like the previous generation didn't play games. We did grow up playing games, but they were all casual players, I think, in my opinion. A large majority are casuals. And I think that's another reason why I don't think the figures that people put of like, oh, how many 12-year-olds are playing Fortnite? Like, how many 12-year-olds are playing Fortnite now are going to do, like, how many of those are actually going to become, like, they're driven to pursue it as a career. And then
or even, like, watch it.
Watch it, exactly, right? It's just like a sort of like a phase in their life. Or, yeah, and then even to so what you've said earlier, I think it's a great point to raise, is that so far we don't see where like it's not considered prestigious yet, right? That's just a sign of it being taboo. It's not prestigious for somebody to want to do this as a career. There's still so much taboo, backlash in society. Like wealthy, rich, educated families won't be sending their kids to do this, right? Yeah. Wealthy, rich, educated families will be sending, if they see talent at a young age, their kids to play sports, right? Yeah, there are many boarding schools that have like spend a lot of money on sports teams, like rowing teams, golf teams, colleges, right? All these educational institutions will spend money to promote their sports teams, not esports teams, right? And we were talking about earlier, like I briefly mentioned, like University of California.
The UCs are getting into this.
Maybe some.
For sure.
But like, I don't know yet if this is like too early to call, basically.
Yeah, and everything is just really underdeveloped from a scouting perspective. Yeah. Like, the talent, like, and it's funny too, because it should have like, there should be the most sort of visibility in the sport. Like you can't like physically see every like basketball player playing.
But you can see the stats. You can see every single, because like I remember Overwatch, right? They had
like you can Dota too. You can like download like replays like from players. Right. You can find like you can like there are ranking boards.
Yeah.
Like, there's stuff like that. So it should make it easier, but often like it's like there's no scouting pros. There's no like actual scouting in place right now, despite these tools.
Yeah.
That are kind of like inherently in place.
Yeah, I don't know. It's all I could say is my final thoughts are just I think it's as a culture, I think it's just not quite there yet, and as an industry, pretty confusing. I think slightly, for the whole point of this podcast, I think it's like overrated.
Yeah, for sure.
Overvalued.
Okay, let me So it looks like we were dropping a ton of frames by the end. I think what was happening was
someone turned on.
It was some internet cap thing, or is my computer just like deciding this wasn't the day? So we're gonna put the VOD up on YouTube. Look forward to more sort of features like this in the future. I think the plan might actually be to make a Dota podcast and then like a general esports podcast or some just like other podcast. So I think it's going to be hard to overlap the two specifically. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in, Matt, the only viewer today. We'll see you guys at a future date. Hopefully, we'll use some other like sort of setup so the stream won't be as garbage. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.